Daniel walked slowly across the shining stone floor of the alien throne hall. His boots echoed with every step, yet he did not look down. He carried something heavy in his hands, but his shoulders remained straight, his eyes calm. The massive chamber was filled with alien nobles, armored guards, and strange banners that moved like they were alive. Every alien eye was on him. At the far end of the hall sat the alien queen. She was tall and radiant, dressed in robes woven with silver and deep blue threads that shimmered under the light of the hovering crystals above. Her crown seemed to float, slightly above her head, glowing faintly with energy. Her expression was unreadable, but her eyes, sharp and golden, fixed on the object Daniel carried. It was her sword. The weapon had a long, curved blade with strange markings that pulsed like veins of light. Legends spoke of its origin, a sword forged not by metal but by a living star, passed down to the royal line of her people. For centuries it had been lost in battles across space, believed gone forever. Now, a human carried it into her hall. Gasps filled the chamber as Daniel stopped at the base of the throne steps. He held the sword out, balanced across both palms. His voice was steady, respectful, but it carried across the silence like a bell. "This belongs to you." The queen's lips pressed into a thin line. Her golden eyes narrowed. No one spoke at first, and then a wave of whispers ran through the hall. Alien nobles hissed in disbelief. Some pointed, others laughed softly, mocking the human's ignorance. Guards shifted their spears, as if ready to end his life at her command. Daniel stood quietly. He expected gratitude, maybe relief. But instead, he saw anger building in her expression. "Do you understand what you have done?" the queen asked finally, her voice deep, echoing like thunder through the hall. Daniel frowned slightly. "I returned what wasn't mine. Isn't that the right thing to do?" Her hand rose and silence fell again. The queen stood slowly, her robes flowing like a river of stars. Her tall frame was intimidating, and the hall itself seemed to tremble with her movement. "You insult me," she said coldly. Daniel blinked. "Insult you? I meant respect. Your sword was lost. I found it. I thought it belonged to you." The queen's nostrils flared. "No one returns the Starblade, not even allies. To place it at my feet means one thing, that you reject the bond of its power, that you call me unworthy." Daniel's chest tightened. He had not known. To him, it was only a gesture of honesty. To them, it was the gravest insult. The court erupted in shouts. "He mocks the queen. Kill him now. This human dares to challenge her throne." Guards stepped forward, but the queen raised her hand again, holding them back. Her gaze stayed locked on Daniel. "Human," she said, her voice sharp. "Do you claim the sword? Do you claim my throne? Do you declare yourself my rival?" Daniel shook his head firmly. "No, I claim nothing. I am not your enemy. I just returned what wasn't mine." The hall exploded again with laughter and rage. Many of her generals shouted for blood. To them, his refusal was weakness. To the nobles, his gesture was unforgivable. Only the queen remained calm, though her eyes burned with fury. Daniel swallowed but did not step back. He had walked here knowing it was dangerous, yet he believed truth was worth the risk. "Then," the queen said slowly, her words slicing the air, "you are either a fool or a deceiver. In both cases, you must prove yourself." She extended. Her hand and the sword lifted from Daniel's palms as if pulled by invisible chains. It flew into her grasp, glowing brighter, resonating with her touch. She held it high, the light casting long shadows across the walls. "This man has returned the Starblade," she declared, her voice booming. "By our law, that act is a challenge. He will not be executed here like a thief. Instead, he will face the trial of the sword." The court roared in approval. Drums pounded. Spears struck the floor. Daniel's heart sank as the meaning became clear. The queen's gaze pierced him like fire. "You will enter the trial. If you live, the sword itself will decide your fate. If you fail, your bones will join those of the countless who came before you." Daniel stood frozen for a moment. He wanted to explain again that he meant no insult, but he realized words no longer mattered. Their law had already claimed him. The queen lowered the sword, its glow fading slightly as she rested the blade against her throne. For a moment, her expression softened, almost thoughtful. But then it hardened again, her fury returning like a mask. "Take him," she ordered. Guards in dark armor surrounded Daniel. Their weapons crackled with energy, ready to strike if he resisted. But he did not. He allowed them to lead him away, his mind racing. As he walked through the hall, he felt hundreds of eyes on him, some mocking, some filled with hatred, and a few strangely curious. The sound of drums still echoed behind him. In that moment, Daniel understood one thing clearly. He had stepped into a storm he never intended to start. And now only his courage would keep him alive. That night in the chamber where he was kept, Daniel sat alone on the stone bench. He thought back to the moment he had found the sword. It had been lying in the ruins of an old battlefield, half buried, in sand and ash. He had not touched it for weeks, fearing its strange glow, until he learned it belonged to the queen herself. He believed returning it would bring peace, maybe even trust, between their peoples. Instead, it had brought him here into a cage with the promise of a deadly trial waiting for him at dawn. Daniel sighed, running his hand through his hair. "Maybe I really am a fool," he whispered to himself. But then he smiled faintly. But better a fool who returns what's not his than a thief who keeps it. Far above in the royal chambers, the queen sat with the sword laid across her knees. Her golden eyes studied the markings, but her thoughts were not on the blade. They were on the human. She replayed his words in her mind. His voice had been steady, without fear, without arrogance. Unlike her rivals, he had shown no desire for power. Yet by returning the sword, he had done something more dangerous. He had touched her honor, her pride, and the traditions that bound her people. Her hands tightened around the hilt. "Foolish human," she whispered. "You may not know what you have done, but the trial will show your true nature." She rose and placed the sword back into its sacred stand. Her anger still burned, but deep within it, a spark of curiosity flickered. Who was this human who dared to walk into her hall unarmed and return the one weapon her people had searched for centuries? She did not yet have the answer. But soon, she would. The next morning, the great drums of the alien palace shook the stone walls. Their sound was heavy and slow, echoing across the city like thunder. Every citizen knew what it meant. Someone was about to face the trial of the sword. Daniel sat in a small chamber beneath the throne hall. 2 guards stood at the door, their tall frames covered in silver-black armor. They never spoke, only watched. Daniel stretched his arms, feeling the tightness in his muscles. He had not slept much. When the door finally opened, an alien officer stepped in. He was tall and lean, his skin a pale gray with ridges running across his forehead. His armor shone with symbols of rank. He looked down at Daniel as if studying an insect. "You are the human," the officer said, his voice sharp. "The one who insulted our queen." Daniel looked up calmly. "I meant no insult." The officer's lip curled slightly, though it was hard to tell if it was amusement or disgust. "Intent does not matter, only the act. The queen has given you the chance of the trial. You should be grateful." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Grateful for a chance to die?" The officer tilted his head, then gave a short, humorless laugh. "If you are strong, you live. If you are weak, you die. It is fair." Daniel sighed but stood to his feet. "Then let's get it over with." The guards chained his wrists, not harshly but firmly, and led him out. The palace courtyard was massive, shaped like an open arena. Thousands of alien citizens filled the stone tiers that rose high around the circle. Their voices blended into a loud roar, a storm of sound that made the ground shake. The arena floor was a wide ring of polished stone, carved with patterns that glowed faintly with energy. At its center stood a tall pillar, and on it rested a simple weapon rack. When Daniel was led into the arena, the crowd's shouting grew even louder. Some booed, others laughed, and many shouted curses in their language. He felt the weight of their hatred pressing against him. but he kept his steps steady. At the far side of the arena, the queen appeared. She walked slowly, her robes trailing, behind her, her crown gleaming. The citizens fell silent the moment she raised her hand. Her golden eyes scanned the arena, then fell on Daniel. "This human," she declared, her voice carrying across the crowd, "returned the Starblade. By our law he has called me unworthy. By our law he must now face the trial of the sword." The crowd roared again, voices rising like fire. Daniel closed his fists. He could feel their hunger for spectacle. The queen gestured to the weapon rack. "Choose your arms, human. You may take one." Daniel was unchained, and he walked to the rack. The weapons were strange. Long-bladed staffs, curved daggers that pulsed with light, and heavy axes with crystal edges. He picked each one up briefly, testing the weight, but none felt right in his hands. At last he saw something at the far end. A plain spear, its shaft simple wood, its tip forged from dull metal. Unlike the other weapons, it had no glow, no shimmer. It was old and worn. The crowd laughed when he picked it. "The human chooses a stick," one shouted. Daniel spun it lightly in his hands, then planted the base on the ground. He gave a small smile. "This will do." The queen's eyes narrowed slightly, as if she were curious at his choice. But she gave no comment. She lifted her hand, and a gate on the arena wall opened. From the shadows emerged his first opponent. The warrior was massive, armored in thick plates, holding a twin-bladed axe that shimmered with green fire. The crowd cheered wildly as he stepped forward. His helmet had horns. His eyes burned with challenge. Daniel gripped the spear tightly. He was outmatched in size, strength, and weapon power. But he reminded himself of one thing. Fights were not always won by the strongest. The warrior charged, the axe swinging in a wide arc. Daniel ducked low, the blade whistling just above his head. Dust flew as the axe struck the ground. Before the warrior could lift it again, Daniel jabbed the spear into his side, not deep, but enough to stagger. The crowd gasped. The warrior snarled and swung again, faster this time. Daniel sidestepped, barely escaping the glowing edge. Sweat formed on his brow. He used speed, not strength, keeping just beyond the warrior's reach, striking quick jabs when he saw openings. After several minutes, the warrior grew tired. His swing slowed. Daniel seized the moment. He ducked under a clumsy strike, spun behind, and swept the warrior's legs with the spear shaft. The giant fell to one knee, his axe clattering on the ground. Daniel raised the spear, aiming at his chest. The crowd held its breath, expecting him to finish the fight. But he paused. He looked into the warrior's eyes, then lowered the spear. He stepped back. The arena erupted in shouts. Some booed, others cried out in disbelief. Mercy was not part of their tradition. To spare an opponent was weakness in their eyes. The warrior, however, looked at Daniel with surprise. He slowly picked up his axe, bowed once, an alien gesture of respect, and left the arena. Daniel stood alone again, his chest rising and falling. He could feel the queen's gaze on him, sharp and unreadable. The second gate opened. Another warrior stepped out, this one smaller but faster, armed with twin daggers that sparked with electric energy. She moved like lightning, her strikes sharp and precise. Daniel fought carefully, blocking with the spear shaft, retreating, and striking when possible. He took a shallow cut on his arm but kept moving, forcing himself not to slow. The battle lasted longer, but at last he disarmed her with a sweeping strike and pinned her weapon to the ground with his spear. Once again, he did not finish her. He stepped back, letting her rise. She looked at him with narrowed eyes, then gave a small nod before leaving. The crowd roared in confusion. Some were angry, others seemed unsettled. This was not how trials went. Daniel leaned on his spear, breathing hard. His arms ached, sweat covered his face, but he stood tall. The queen rose slowly from her throne. The crowd fell into silence again. "You fight with skill," she said, her voice carrying, "but you refuse to finish. Why?" Daniel looked up at her. His voice was hoarse but steady. "Because they were already beaten. Killing them would prove nothing. Mercy is strength too. A murmur swept the crowd. Aliens exchanged confused glances. Mercy was not a word they valued, yet the humans spoke it with such certainty. The queen's golden eyes lingered on him for a long moment. She seemed both angered and intrigued. Then she raised her hand again. "One more," she declared. The final gate opened, and from it stepped a figure taller than any before, an elder champion scarred and heavy with armor. He carried no glowing weapon, only a simple blade, but the weight of his presence filled the arena. The crowd bowed their heads in silence. Daniel gripped his spear tighter. He knew this fight would test everything he had. The elder's eyes met his. For a brief second, Daniel thought he saw no hatred there, only calm recognition. The queen's voice thundered once more. "Let the final battle begin." The drums boomed, the crowd roared, and Daniel took his first step toward the elder. His fate balanced between survival and death. The drums rolled like thunder, shaking the stone floor of the arena. The crowd leaned forward, their golden eyes fixed on the two figures standing across from each other. Daniel tightened his grip on the plain spear, his hands slick with sweat. Across from him stood the elder champion, taller, broader, with armor worn from countless battles. His face bore scars, his eyes steady and calm. Unlike the other challengers, the elder did not rush forward. He stood still, blade in hand, watching Daniel with the patience of a hunter. The silence between them was heavy. Daniel circled slowly, the spear held ready. His legs ached from the earlier fights, his arm throbbed where the second warrior's blade had cut him, but he forced himself to focus. He could not afford distraction now. The elder finally moved. He stepped forward with slow, deliberate steps, his blade glinting under the light of the floating crystals above. When he swung, it was not wild or reckless. It was precise, controlled, and heavy with experience. Daniel barely blocked the strike with the spear shaft. The impact vibrated through his arms, nearly tearing the weapon from his hands. He stumbled back, his chest tightening. This was not like the others. This opponent was measured, patient, and far more dangerous. The elder pressed forward with another strike, then another, each one forcing Daniel backward. The crowd cheered, their voices crashing like waves. Daniel's breath grew short, but his mind stayed sharp. He had no chance of winning with strength. He needed to outthink his opponent. Daniel feigned a stumble, lowering his guard slightly. The elder stepped in quickly, blade flashing toward his chest. At the last second, Daniel twisted, bringing the spear up in a sudden upward strike. The spear shaft knocked the elder's blade aside, and Daniel thrust forward, aiming for his shoulder. The elder blocked with surprising speed, twisting his blade to push the spear off course. Sparks flew as metal scraped against metal. Daniel had no time to strike again before the elder countered with a sweeping blow that knocked him off his feet. Daniel hit the ground hard, rolling to avoid the killing strike. The blade cut deep into the stone where his body had been. Dust sprayed into the air. The crowd roared in approval, chanting the elder's name. Daniel coughed, forcing himself to his knees. His ribs ached, his hands shook, but he would not give. Up he raised the spear again, eyes locked on the elder. "You're strong," Daniel muttered under his breath. "But strength isn't everything." The fight dragged on. Daniel dodged, parried, and struck when he could, but each move cost him more energy. The elder's strikes were slower than the younger warriors, but far more dangerous. Each one could end the battle in an instant. At one point, the elder swung low, aiming at Daniel's legs. Daniel leapt back, but the tip of the blade grazed his thigh, drawing blood. Pain shot through him, and he stumbled. The elder stepped closer, ready to finish it. The crowd rose to their feet, expecting the end. But Daniel, desperate, slammed the butt of his spear into the ground and kicked forward with both feet, striking the elder's chest. The impact pushed the elder back a step, just enough for Daniel to roll away and scramble to his feet again. He stood, breathing hard, sweat running down his face. But he was alive. The crowd gasped in shock. The queen leaned forward on her throne, her golden eyes sharp. She had expected the human to fall quickly, but he kept rising again and again. The elder looked at Daniel with something new in his eyes. Not anger, not mockery, but respect. He gave a small nod, then raised his blade again. Daniel tightened, his grip on the spear. His body was near its limit, but his mind stayed steady. He thought of Earth, of all the times humans had survived against impossible odds. He thought of every moment where creativity and stubbornness had been stronger than brute force. The elder struck again, this time with a wide swing. Daniel ducked, rolling under the blade, and jabbed the spear into the elder's knee. The blow was not strong, but it made the elder stumble. For the first time, the crowd gasped. Their champion had faltered. Daniel pressed the advantage, thrusting the spear toward the elder's chest. The elder blocked, but Daniel spun the shaft and swept it across his legs again, knocking him slightly off balance. The elder stumbled backward, his blade lowered. Daniel raised the spear for a final strike, then stopped. He stood still, chest heaving, sweat dripping from his chin. The spear was poised, but he did not move. The elder looked up at him, breathing hard. Slowly, Daniel lowered the spear. "I won't kill you," Daniel said loudly enough for the crowd to hear. "You're beaten, that's enough." The arena went silent. The crowd exploded into shouts. Some screamed in rage, demanding blood. Others were stunned, unable to believe what they had seen. Mercy was not their way. To spare a beaten opponent was unthinkable. The queen rose from her throne, her face hard and unreadable. She looked down at Daniel, her golden eyes burning with something between fury and curiosity. "You dare to defy our law?" she demanded, her voice thundering. Daniel stood straight, though his body trembled. "I fight to prove myself, not to destroy. Victory isn't about killing, it's about surviving, about choosing who you are. I choose mercy." The crowd erupted again, some booing, some whispering, their voices clashing like a storm. The elder, champion, slowly rose to his feet. He looked at Daniel for a long moment, then lowered his blade. In a deep voice, he spoke words that echoed through the arena. "This human has strength, not of the body, but of spirit." The crowd fell silent. The elder's words carried weight no one could ignore. The queen's eyes narrowed, her fury flashing like fire. But beneath it, she felt something else stirring. Confusion, maybe even admiration. The trial had not gone as expected. The human had fought with courage, defied their traditions, and still lived. The queen raised her hand. The arena quieted. "The trial is finished," she declared. Her voice was cold, but her eyes remained fixed on Daniel. "The human lives, for now." The crowd murmured, some in protest, others in awe. The elder bowed once to Daniel, then walked away, leaving the human alone in the center of the arena. Daniel lowered his spear, his chest still heaving. He knew the danger was not over. The queen's fury had not burned out. It had only changed shape. That night, Daniel was taken back to his chamber. His wounds were cleaned by alien healers, though they spoke little to him. He sat on the stone bench again, staring at the wall, his thoughts racing. He had survived the trial. Against all odds, he had lived. But what came next? Above him, in her royal chambers, the queen stood by the window, the star blade resting on her table. She stared out at the glowing city, her mind unsettled. The human had shown strength, yes, but not the kind she knew. His mercy, his refusal to kill his stubborn survival, it clashed with everything her people believed, and yet, she could not stop thinking about it. "Foolish human," she whispered, her voice low. "What are you?" The palace was quiet that evening, but the silence was heavy, filled with tension. The sound of the drums had faded, and the citizens returned to their homes, still whispering about the human who had spared their champions in the arena. Some called him a fool, others said he was a coward, but a few in hushed voices wondered if he carried a strength they could not see. Daniel sat in his chamber, his arms wrapped in fresh bandages. His body ached, but he was alive. He stared at the faint light seeping through the high window. The trial was over, but his fate remained uncertain. He had survived, yes, but survival did not mean freedom. The door creaked open. 2 guards entered, followed by a tall woman with markings on her cheeks and robes of authority. She was the queen's attendant, one of the few trusted to speak in her presence. "The queen summons you," the woman said coldly. Daniel stood slowly, his ribs protesting. The guards escorted him through winding halls lit by floating crystals, until they reached a great chamber. Its high ceiling arched like the sky itself, painted with constellations. At the far end sat the queen, not on her throne this time, but on a simple seat carved from stone. The star blade rested across her lap, glowing faintly. Daniel was led to stand before her. The guards stepped back, leaving the two of them alone, except for the attendant who remained silent at the door. The queen's golden eyes studied him carefully, as though weighing every part of him. Finally she spoke. "You refused to kill. You defied our law. And yet you lived. Tell me, human, why?" Daniel met her gaze. His voice was tired but steady. "Because I believe life has value. Killing when it is not needed doesn't prove strength. It proves fear." The queen's jaw tightened. "Fear? Our warriors fear nothing." Daniel shook his head. "They fear weakness. That's why they kill when they don't have to, because they are afraid to look merciful." The queen rose slowly, the star blade in her hand. Her robes flowed like a storm around her as she stepped closer. "You speak boldly for someone who stood near death. But words are not enough. If you believe what you say, then prove it again." Daniel frowned. "How?" The queen turned and walked to the wide balcony. She motioned for him to follow. Beyond the balcony stretched the great city, glowing with lights and towers. But at the horizon, dark smoke was rising. The faint sound of horns drifted through the night air. Daniel's eyes narrowed. "That's an attack." The queen nodded once. "Our enemies test us often. Tonight they send raiders. They will strike the outer walls within the hour, and you, human, will stand with my soldiers to defend them." Daniel blinked. "You want me to fight your war?" "I want to see your truth," the queen said sharply. "In the arena you claimed mercy is strength. Let us see if you hold that belief when real blood falls, when cities burn, when children cry for help. If you are honest, you will act. If you are a liar, you will die." Daniel was silent for a moment, then nodded. "Then I'll fight." The queen's eyes gleamed. "Good. Perhaps the storm will reveal who you truly are." The walls of the city were alive with movement. Soldiers in silver armor lined the battlements, their weapons glowing with energy. Civilians hurried to shelters as horns echoed again, from beyond the plains. The night air was thick with smoke and the smell of burning oil. Daniel was given only a basic shield and a simple sword. The soldiers around him laughed quietly at the sight. "He will not last 5 breaths." One muttered, "Why waste armor on him?" Another scoffed. Daniel ignored them. He stood at the battlements, staring into the distance. He could see figures moving, dozens, maybe hundreds, raiders charging toward the city walls, their weapons crackling. With strange light, the queen appeared on a high tower, the star blade glowing in her hand. Her voice thundered across the city. "Stand firm, my people. The enemy comes to break us, but tonight they will fall." The soldiers roared in reply, raising their weapons high. The enemy struck like a wave. Explosions shook the stone walls. Grappling hooks latched onto the battlements, and raiders began climbing up with furious speed. Arrows of light streaked through the air. Daniel's heart pounded, but his body moved. He lifted his shield as a glowing bolt slammed into it, nearly throwing him back. Another raider leapt over the wall, roaring as his blade swung down. Daniel blocked with the shield and shoved forward, slashing his sword across the raider's chest. The enemy fell. The soldiers around him paused, shocked. The human had survived the first strike. More raiders poured over the wall. Daniel fought beside the soldiers, his movements sharp and quick. He did not have their strength or their strange weapons, but he had speed, creativity, and an iron will. He ducked under swings, used his shield to push enemies off the wall, and fought with the simple skill of a survivor. At one moment, a young alien soldier slipped, his weapon knocked from his hand. A raider raised his blade to strike him down. Without hesitation, Daniel lunged, blocking the strike with his shield and shoving the enemy back. He helped the soldier to his feet. The young alien stared at him with wide eyes, then gave a quick nod of gratitude before grabbing his weapon again. The battle raged for what felt like hours. The night sky glowed with fire, and the air shook with the clash of steel and energy. Daniel's arms ached, his shield cracked, and his legs trembled, but he refused to stop. From her tower, the queen watched. Her golden eyes followed him across the battlements. She saw how he fought, not just for himself, but for those around him. He saved soldiers who stumbled, pulled wounded back, and never left anyone behind. He did not fight for glory. He fought to protect. Her grip on the star blade tightened. She had expected him to run or to die quickly, but instead he became a rallying point. Soldiers who had mocked him now shouted beside him, their voices rising with renewed strength. At last, the enemy horn sounded retreat. The raiders pulled back, disappearing into the smoke and darkness. The city walls held. The soldiers roared in victory, raising their weapons high. Daniel stood in the middle of them, his chest heaving, his shield splintered, his sword chipped. He wiped sweat from his brow and looked out at the horizon. He was alive, and the city still stood. When the battle ended, Daniel was summoned once more to the queen's chambers. He walked through the palace halls, his clothes torn, his arms bandaged, but his steps steady. The queen waited by the window, the star blade glowing faintly in the moonlight. She turned as he entered, her golden eyes sharp but thoughtful. "You fought well," she said slowly. "Even without strength you endured. Even without honor you protected." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Without honor?" The queen's lips curved faintly. "To us mercy is weakness, but you show it again and again, even in battle. You saved those who would not have saved you. You risked yourself without thought. My people call it foolishness, yet," she paused, her voice softer, "I cannot ignore the power of it." Daniel met her gaze. "Mercy doesn't make us weak. It makes us human." The queen stared at him for a long moment. For the first time, her anger seemed to waver. Her voice dropped almost to a whisper. "Perhaps it makes you something more." She turned away quickly, her robes flowing behind her, hiding her expression. But her thoughts burned with questions she had never asked before. For the first time, the alien queen was not certain of her own truth. The city had survived the raid, but its people were restless. In the days that followed, whispers filled every street and market. Some called the human a strange fool who should have died in the trial. Others called him a coward who spared enemies when he could have slain them. Yet more and more voices began to speak differently. They said the human had stood where many would have fallen. They said he had fought with a fire that could not be ignored. Daniel walked the palace halls with quiet steps, feeling the weight of those whispers pressing on him. He did not seek praise or power. He only wanted to prove he meant no insult, that his choice to return the sword was not rebellion, but honesty. Yet each day that passed, the queen's gaze followed him more closely, her golden eyes searching for something she could not name. On the 5th day after the battle, the horns sounded again. This time they were deeper, heavier, filled with warning. The enemy had not simply retreated, they had gathered their full strength. From the high walls of the palace, Daniel saw them, thousands of raiders marching across the plains, their banners dark against the horizon. Siege machines rolled forward, glowing with strange energy. The air trembled with their chants. The city's soldiers prepared quickly, but fear spread among them. They had fought raiders before, but never in such numbers. The people crowded the streets, terrified. The queen stood tall on the balcony of the palace, the star blade in her hand. Its glow was brighter than before, as if it sensed the coming storm. Her voice rang across the city. "People of the Empire, the enemy seeks to burn our homes, to crush our walls, to silence our children. But we will not bow. We will not break." The soldiers roared in reply, but their voices shook with unease. Daniel stepped forward. "Let me fight with them again." The queen turned to him, her golden eyes narrowing. You would stand in this war, human, when death is certain? Daniel nodded. I will fight, because I promised myself. I will never walk away when I can protect someone. For a long moment the queen studied him. Then she lifted the star blade. High, its light spread across the city like dawn. Then fight, human, she said. Fight, and let the sword itself judge you. The battle began with thunder. The enemy's siege weapons hurled fire against the walls. Explosions shook the ground, stone cracked, towers fell. Soldiers rushed to their positions, shouting, firing, glowing bolts into the mass of raiders. Daniel stood among them, shield and spear in hand. His body still carried wounds from the trial and the last battle, but his spirit burned brighter than ever. When the raiders reached the walls, he was there, meeting them head-on. He fought with everything he had. His shield blocked glowing arrows. His spear drove back enemies trying to climb the battlements. When a soldier fell beside him, Daniel pulled him up. When a group of raiders broke through a section of the wall, Daniel rallied the defenders, standing firm like a rock in the storm. The battle raged for hours. Smoke filled the air. The cries of warriors shook the sky. The queen herself descended from the tower, the star blade blazing in her hands. She cut through the enemy like fire, her people roaring her name. But still the raiders pressed harder. The walls cracked under the weight of their siege engines. At last, a section collapsed, and the enemy poured into the streets. Daniel found himself separated from the main force, surrounded by raiders. His shield shattered, his spear broken. He grabbed a fallen sword, its edge chipped, and stood ready. Come on then, he muttered, breath ragged. The raiders charged, but before their blades fell, a storm of golden light struck them down. The queen appeared at his side, the star blade, glowing like a star in her grasp. You fight like a fool, she said sharply, but you fight with a heart I cannot ignore. Daniel gave a weak smile. Better a fool who stands than a coward who runs. For the first time, the queen's lips curved faintly, almost like a smile. Together they fought side by side. She struck with the power of a queen, and he struck with the stubbornness of a human who refused to fall. Their blades cut through, wave after wave, their voices rising above the chaos. The soldiers saw them and rallied. The defenders surged forward, their courage reborn. Slowly, painfully, the enemy began to falter. Their chants turned to cries of retreat. Their banners wavered. At last the raiders broke and fled into the smoke, leaving the city standing. When the battle was over, the city roared with victory. Soldiers raised their weapons. Citizens wept with relief. The walls were broken, the streets scarred, but the people were alive. In the palace hall, the queen stood before her people, the star blade in her hands. Daniel stood at her side, battered and bloodied but unbroken. The queen lifted the sword high, its light shining across the chamber. This weapon, she said, her voice ringing, has chosen its bearer for centuries. It is the heart of our people, the proof of our strength. Yet this human who returned it in honesty, who faced trial, who fought with us in battle, has shown something no enemy could break. He has shown courage not bound by our laws, but by his own truth. The hall fell silent, every eye fixed on her. The queen lowered the star blade, and instead of holding it close, she placed it at Daniel's feet. The gesture sent shock through the room. To return the sword is insult, she said. To carry. It is destiny. Today I do not see an enemy, I do not see a fool, I see an equal. Daniel stared at the sword, its glow reflecting in his eyes. Slowly he bent down and lifted it. The blade hummed in his hands, brighter than before, as if welcoming him. The hall erupted in cries. Some shouted in shock, some in anger, but many bowed their heads in respect. The queen's golden eyes softened as she looked at him. Her voice, though still strong, carried something new, something almost gentle. The sword chose its bearer, she said, and so have I. That night, Daniel stood on the balcony of the palace, the star blade resting at his side. The city stretched before him, scarred but alive. Behind him, the queen approached quietly, her robes whispering against the stone. You have changed many things, she said. My people will not forget what you did. Daniel looked at her, tired but smiling faintly. Neither will I. The queen studied him for a moment, then turned her gaze to the stars. For the first time in many years, she felt her anger ease, replaced by something she had never allowed herself to feel: hope. Beside her, the human stood with the sword that once belonged only to her. Yet somehow, in his hands, it felt as though it belonged to them both.